Greetings, and welcome back to the 31 Nights of Fright. Before we start today's video, I just want to let you guys know that Arrow Video have just started their Shocktober sale. In this sale, you can get up to 50% off Blu-rays, 4Ks, and limited edition releases. On top of that, I also have my own discount code, Real Horror, that if you guys use at the checkout, you'll get an additional 10% off your order. The discount code can be used on all products on the site, besides pre-orders, but it can also be used on discounted items in the sale. There'll be a link in the description of this video so you can head over to the Arrow store, take a look at all the amazing releases that Arrow have on offer, and then use the discount code to save yourself some cash. And just to let you guys know, the Shocktober sale lasts all month. Anyway, onto the video. In the last episode, we took a look at one of the most iconic movies of all time with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, a film that is considered to be one of the most influential in the genre and cinema as a whole. A huge part of Psycho's timeless legacy would be its infamous shower scene that has been parodied in countless films over the years and is still the imagery that people think of first when they think of a horror film over 60 years later. However, Hitchcock had to shoot that scene in a way that implied the violence rather than showing it. This was due to something called the Hays Code that was established in 1934, a set of guidelines and rules that prohibited motion pictures from showing gore, violence, and explicit content. But throughout the 60s, many filmmakers were becoming increasingly frustrated with these set of rules and being held back by them. And in 1968, the Hays Code was lifted, and a new rating system was introduced, the MPAA system. Times were indeed changing, and filmmakers were pushing more and more boundaries. 1968 would actually prove to be a very important year for cinema, as in addition to the replacement of the Hays Code, a small independent film would come along that would also push those boundaries. It would also become one of the most important films of its time and change the entire horror genre forever. That film is The Night of the Living Dead. At this period of time, independent films were still pretty much unheard of, and a young filmmaker from Pittsburgh by the name of George A. Romero was ready to break the mold. Along with his friends in the industry, Russ Streiner, who along with Judy Fourday, who plays Barbara in the film, I had the greatest fortune of meeting, and they are both just the loveliest people, and John Russo, who co-wrote the film with Romero, the three decided to make a feature-length movie. Naturally, due to having a very small budget, and also due to the rising popularity of the genre, they settled on making a horror film. The three of them joined forces with Carl Hardman and Marilyn Eastman, who ran a Pittsburgh-based industrial film firm and created the small production company they named Image 10. And by the way, when I say small independent film, I really mean small and independent. This film was directed, co-written, edited, and photographed by George A. Romero, and had just a ridiculously small cast and crew. In fact, most of the production team actually played roles in the movie. Hardman and Eastman, for example, played Harry and Helen Cooper, Russ Streiner played the role of Johnny, and Romero himself played a reporter. This is a classic example of what they call guerrilla filmmaking on a shoestring budget. So Image 10 all threw in $600 each of their own money, giving the film an initial budget of $6,000. Obviously that's not enough to fund a motion picture though, so production stopped multiple times and Romero used the footage they managed to film to show to potential investors. This resulted in Image 10 raising just over $100,000, which is around $1 million in today's money, which allowed them to finish their movie. All of this paid off in the end, however, quite literally, as the film grossed a total sum of about $30 million. That's over 250 times its budget, which made Night of the Living Dead one of the most profitable films of its time. It was also one of the most controversial due to its gore and disturbing visuals, but funnily enough, in a similar vein to Hitchcock's Psycho, the blood used in the film was chocolate syrup. The premise of the film was inspired greatly by Richard Matheson's 1954 novel I Am Legend, a story about the end of humanity as the world's population has been replaced with vampires, with only one human remaining. The plot of Romero's film follows a group of survivors stranded in a farmhouse attempting to survive the plague of the undead. And this brings us to the main aspect of the Night of the Living Dead that changed horror forever: the introduction of the modern zombie. Now, zombies and ghouls existed long before 1968, but they were just mindless puppets, usually used by a much greater evil, and they didn't resemble or carry any of the characteristics of a zombie that we know today. But it's this film that would establish the Romero zombie. From the slow, staggering limp walk, the lore that they can be destroyed if you attack the head, and of course, their hunger for flesh. It's also important to note that this film doesn't even use the word zombie. The undead in this film are referred to as ghouls. It's kind of uncertain when and how they were given the title of zombie, but eventually the name caught on and Romero would use that to describe them from that point forward, as did the rest of the world. Also, the title of the film was not originally The Night of the Living Dead. It was actually called Night of Anubis. I'm not so sure on that title, and obviously neither were they, as it became Night of the Flesh Eaters. A much better title, but due to a film called The Flesh Eaters that was released just 3 years prior, the distribution company renamed the film last minute to avoid any confusion. This is one of those things that I believe were just meant to be. Due to this name change and retitling, the phrase The Living Dead was coined as an alternate term for zombie. Long story short, this film single-handedly started the zombie subgenre. What a legacy. The Night of the Living Dead is also considered to be one of the most important and decade-defining films of its era, putting the film's overall influence on independent filmmaking and the fact it completely changed the horror genre to one side for a second. Night of the Living Dead is an extremely political movie, and it had a lot to say about American society at the time, even without directly saying it. For starters, Romero said himself that the zombies in the film are a metaphor that reflects a new society, devouring the old and changing everything. And you can try as hard as you possibly can to stop it, but the revolution, or in this case, zombie apocalypse, is ultimately inevitable. On top of this, the film stars Duane Jones as Ben, the main protagonist of the film. Remember that this film came out in 1968, the height of the civil rights movement. At this point in time, it was very rare and potentially controversial to cast a black man as the hero and main character of a film. In fact, this marked the first time a black actor was ever the main star of a horror film. With that said, the character of Ben was not written in the script as a man of colour. George A. Romero said that it just happened that Duane was the best actor who auditioned and he got the job. With that said, and whether they intended it to happen or not, that changed the film. The character of Harry, played by Carl Hardman, who is a selfish and irrational character who always tries to be the dominant figure, takes an instant disliking to Ben and, at one point, leaves him to die. Harry is a man who always believes himself to be right. Is this a man with an alpha male complex? Or is there more under the surface? At the end of the film, armed men arrive at the farmhouse to dispose of the remaining ghouls. One of the men notices a shadowy figure in the window, and it turns out to be Ben, the only character in the film who survived the horde of flesh-eating zombies. Then, the man points his gun and pulls the trigger, mistaking Ben for a zombie. This is an extremely poignant and pessimistic ending, but it would end up being all too true to real life, as in April of that year, civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Again, Duane Jones was cast because he was the best actor for the job, and Romero didn't change the script to suit this casting choice. But even when I first saw the film, I read it as Harry is prejudiced against Ben because of his race, and I also found the ending to be an extremely powerful social message. No matter the intention of the filmmakers, this is the film they made. The Night of the Living Dead impacted not just horror, but popular culture forever and left a lasting legacy that cannot be understated. The fact that this film gave birth to what we now know as the zombie is enough said, but in doing so, the movie created a whole new subgenre of which we still cannot get enough of. The zombie plays a huge part in popular culture, and it's all thanks to this little film. Additionally, the film's subtext made it one of the most important movies of its time and was the start of an era people call the horror renaissance that lasted up until the beginning of the 80s. This decade or so saw the rise in social political horror films that reflected the times in which they were made and captured the turmoil of society. The swinging 60s came to an end, the Summer of Love was killed off by the Manson family, the Beatles broke up, the Vietnam War was still going on, and America would find itself ending up in a recession. Things were getting much darker, and the horror movies that followed certainly reflected that. So join me in the next episode as we enter the 1970s and take a look at one of the grittiest horror films ever made, that tells the story of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'll see you there.